When the telegraph was the fastest method of communication, a young man applied for a job as a Morse code operator. Answering an ad in the newspaper, he went to the office address that was listed. When he arrived, he entered a large, busy office filled with noise and clatter, including the sound of a telegraph in the background. A sign on the receptionist's desk instructed job applicants to fill out a form and wait until someone took them into the inner office. Taking the form, the young man filled it out and sat down with the 7 other applicants in the waiting room. After a few minutes, he stood up, crossed the room to the door of the inner office, and walked right in. Well, naturally, the other applicants perked up. What in the world was going on? Muttering to themselves, they hadn't heard any summons yet. They assumed the applicant who went into the office had made a mistake and would be disqualified. Within a few minutes, the employer escorted the young man out of the office and said to the other applicants, "Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, but the job has just been filled." The other applicants began complaining, and one protested, "Wait a minute. I don't understand. He was the last one to come in. We never even got a chance to be interviewed, yet he gets the job? That's not fair." "I'm sorry," the employer said, "but all the time you've been sitting here, the telegraph has been ticking out the following message in Morse code. If you understand this message, then come right in. The job is yours." None of you understood it. This young man did. The job is his. Mordecai had been sitting at the king's gate for nearly 4 years when the king promoted Haman above all the Medo-Persian princes who advised the king. Esther 3, verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. Since Haman is not listed among the other 7 princes during Ahasuerus' 3rd year, which is mentioned in Esther 1:14, Haman must have ascended to the position of prime minister rather quickly. His sudden rise to power caught Mordecai by surprise, making him sit up and take notice. It registered a very subtle but clear message in his mind. Mordecai heard a voice from God, the divine rhythm of Morse code ticking in the background against the clatter of the Persian world, where people were distracted with life and unable to hear. That voice from God declared, "If you understand this, you are in pretty big trouble. It is time to take a stand." Morse code is a system of dots and dashes and pauses, once used to send all radio and telegraph messages. The dots result from quickly pressing and releasing the key of the telegraph sender. It produces a rapid click-clack sound in the receiver at the other end. The operator makes a dash by holding down the key longer, thus prolonging the time between the click and the clack. Spaces are the pauses between the clicks and clacks of dots and dashes. Particular sequences and durations of clicks and clacks represent the letters of the alphabet. So A is a dot and a dash. B is a dash and 3 dots, and so on. The rhythm of the dots and dashes tick along at a fairly rapid pace. If you know the code and your ear can catch the rhythm of the clicks and clacks, then you can decipher that message. That is, if you are listening. A few dots and dashes can easily get lost in the click-clack rhythm of the story. If Mordecai had missed them, he would have been doomed. If you and I miss them, we will not only misunderstand the story of Esther, we could be doomed as well. Well, so then what are those dots and dashes? What was that code ticking away its message in Mordecai's mind? Haman was an Agagite. That may sound like some kind of rock you find on a rock hunt way out in the west, but Mordecai knew exactly what that meant, and it sent chills up his spine. I want to stop here for a moment and point out a very clear but not always obvious contrast that the book of Esther relates between Mordecai and Haman. Something Mordecai understood immediately may not be all that important to us at first glance. Earlier in the story, the Bible tells us in Esther 2, verse 5, there was a Jew in Susa, the capital, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Now, in Esther 3, we learned that Haman is the son of Hammedatha, an Agagite. So what, you say? The point of Mordecai's lineage is to show some connection, direct or indirect, to King Saul, who was also a son of Kish, a Benjamite. And Haman's lineage connects him in some way to the Amalekite king Agag. No other characters in the entire story of Esther have anything to say about their lineage, including King Ahasuerus, even though he is mentioned 167 times. Now, if you know your biblical history, you will remember that the Amalekites were the ones who mercilessly and ruthlessly attacked the Israelites who lagged behind in their march from Egypt to Canaan. You find that story in Deuteronomy 25, 17 to 18, and in Exodus 17, 8 through 16. The Amalekites were an idolatrous people who had absolutely no respect at all for Israel's God. They proved to be lifelong, bitter enemies of the Jews. The day came when God instructed King Saul to eradicate the Amalekites once and for all. They had filled up their cup of rebellion against God and animosity toward his people. But when Saul defeated the Amalekite king, he did not kill him. Samuel eventually did. The Agagites, descendants of the Amalekites, got their name from the king that King Saul did not kill. His name was Agag. So in short, we have a long-running feud that has been going on here, reaching back more than 900 years before the events in the book of Esther take place. Sort of like the ethnic and religious rivalry in Ireland and the Middle East and Rwanda and Yugoslavia and so many other places, where resentments between age-old enemies sometimes pass down through succeeding generations. It undoubtedly was the case with Haman. He too nurtured incredible hatred toward the Jews. His hatred was like a time bomb waiting to explode. Mordecai simply provided Haman with the opportunity to awaken his dormant hatred. That's why Haman's full name later includes the contemptuous label, the enemy of the Jews. Haman literally incarnated the original hostility, the original hatred, the absolutely brutal evil of his forefathers. He personified evil. You say, okay, so what, Sherry? When the Persian king promoted Haman to prime minister, Mordecai suddenly understood something extremely important about his contemporary world. He was a Jew from Jerusalem, living in Susa, caught up in the business of the Persian world rather than God's business. Someone who should have been in the capital of God's sphere of influence, Jerusalem, is living in the capital of the world's sphere of influence, Susa. The order from Cyrus for the Jews to return home had gone out more than 50 years earlier, and a second decree by Darius had followed that. But Mordecai is still living in Persia. The narrator's point is that both Mordecai and Esther have their sights set on earthly affairs, not spiritual matters. They typify the average Jew of the exile. God's people had adopted the customs and social conventions of the surrounding heathen nations. They blended in with their pagan neighbors to such an extent that, at least in the case of Mordecai and Esther, distinguishing them from their secular neighbors is virtually impossible. But life in Persia had gotten pretty good. In fact, life in Persia could not have gotten much better. Esther was queen. Mordecai is an official at the king's gate and had even saved the king's life. Humanly speaking, Mordecai and his people were as secure as any exiled people could possibly be. They, along with their Persian neighbors, were enjoying the good life. But when Mordecai saw Haman, now at Persia's helm as prime minister, the principal mover and shaker behind the king, he realized things in his comfortable little world were not as benign, not as harmless, not as safe as he first thought. Suddenly, the awesome Persian Empire, with all of its magnificent human achievements, with all of its splendor and the good life it both provided and promised, held tremendous capacity for evil. He realized it was inherently anti-God and naturally in opposition to God's people. Mordecai is basically staring evil in the face. Evil that would ultimately try to destroy him. It was a wake-up call. I can't help wondering if it took the promotion of Haman to Mordecai's prime minister to shake Mordecai out of his comfortable slumber. Could it be that nothing else would have broken Persia's bewitching hold on him and his people? Could it be that the God who changes times and epochs, who removes kings and establishes kings, knew that Mordecai would understand he was encountering evil only if he saw it in the face of the likes of Haman the Agagite? I think so. The God who had Esther waiting in the wings to fill the vacancy left by Vashti is the same God who allowed Haman's rapid rise to power. Now, no doubt, Satan was working too. Prophets and Kings tells us that Satan himself, the hidden instigator of the scheme, was trying to rid the earth of those who preserve a knowledge of the true God. But God knew that not any old, ruthless, anti-Semitic prime minister would do. It would take an Agagite, someone like Haman, to do the trick. There needed to be some unmistakable code that would unleash its pregnant imagery in Mordecai's imagination if he was to catch what was really going on in his world before it was too late. Mordecai and his people were like the proverbial frog in the kettle, completely aware of the danger they were in. They could not discern that quiet shift in temperature that would soon cook them for all eternity. That is why God chose something radical, an unmistakable code whose meaning could not be missed. An Agagite ascending to prime minister was the way to catch Mordecai's attention. It's part of the surprise and the irony of this little book, that God uses the very thing that will try to destroy them to awaken spiritual passion among his people and to accomplish his purpose for them. Fortunately, Mordecai caught the subtle message that God relayed in Esther 3, verse 2. All of the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. Mordecai neither bowed nor paid homage. Okay, wait a minute, Sherry, you say. It wouldn't have mattered who Ahasuerus made prime minister. Mordecai still wouldn't have bowed down. I'm not so sure about that. Let's take a closer look. See, Mordecai's response was no quick, oh, Jews don't bow down to officials because of the second commandment kind of stuff. The simple act of honoring an office would present no problems for a contemporary Jew such as Mordecai, who had already taught his foster daughter humility and respect, allowed her to marry a Gentile king, and then counseled her repeatedly for nearly 5 years to keep quiet about her faith. Don't let anyone know who you really are or what you really believe. He repeatedly advised her that. It was also quite common for Jews and other people of the East to bow to those in high office or those whom they respected. Abraham bowed to the Canaanite sons of Heth in Genesis 23:7. Jacob bowed to Esau in Genesis 33:3. Jacob's sons bowed to Joseph, the governor of Egypt, in Genesis 42, verse 6. We find David bowing to Saul in 1 Samuel 24:8. The woman of Tekoa bowing to David in 2 Samuel 14:4. Bathsheba bows to David in 1 Kings 1:16. Even Esther prostrates herself before King Ahasuerus in Esther 8, verse 3. Besides, Mordecai had hidden his own faith quite well. He was simply asking Esther to do what he himself was already doing. Look at the reaction of his colleagues at the king's gate when they notice that Mordecai is not bowing to Haman. Esther 3, verse 3. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why are you transgressing the king's command?" See, this is obviously something new they hadn't seen in Mordecai before. This text further suggests that the colleagues at the gate were apparently Mordecai's friends, or at least good acquaintances or working buddies, because when they discover he is acting in disobedience to the king's command, they did not immediately report him. Their first reaction was to question Mordecai about his actions. Verse 4 tells us they questioned his unusual and uncustomary behavior every day. So no doubt they liked him, and they were his friends. And his fellow servants kept encouraging him to comply with the king's command. But at the bottom, though, they're trying to understand. This tells us Mordecai's colleagues didn't really know very much about Mordecai's private life. They certainly didn't have a clear picture of what it meant to be a Jew. Obviously, in a cosmopolitan setting like Susa, diversity in racial and religious things kind of got blurred and seemed unimportant. Like in our modern world, we don't often notice around us what others do or don't do. We work alongside people every day. Maybe we carpool with them or we use Uber. We play on the same soccer team. We have kids in the same grade at school, but we never really get to know each other or reveal very much about ourselves. Many in our world don't know whether we're Christians or not. How easily we keep quiet about our Adventist heritage. Mordecai is not that different from us. The fact is, he's done a pretty good job of keeping his faith private. Now, however, in that single act of refusing to bow to Haman, he could no longer hide his identity. Even then, Haman didn't notice Mordecai. Someone had to tell him. Only when Mordecai's colleagues point out to him does Haman even stop to look for himself. Esther 3, 4 and 5. Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down to him or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. Well, yeah, that's just like a Jew. I had no idea we had one of those this close to the king. Have you ever got a new car, at least new to you, and you drive down the road and not suddenly you see that car everywhere you go? That's called selective perception. Suddenly Haman sees Mordecai everywhere he goes, and he becomes consumed with getting even. See, something deeper is going on here than the mere honoring or ignoring an official in a public office. It's something more than a mere Jews don't bow down to officials because of the second commandment kind of thing. When Mordecai saw Haman at that top of that Persian political ladder, he could no longer play games or be lukewarm. He could no longer go for all the gusto his Persian world had to offer because at the bottom it had to do with worship, the loyalty of his heart either to God or to the world. Haman simply personified what was really at stake. Somehow, bowing down and paying homage to Haman went beyond the individual, beyond the simple courtesy and respect for a man in high office. It extended to worship, to where his heart had focused its affection. Perhaps that's why the Hebrew words here are used are kara, which means to bow down, and saha, which means to prostrate oneself. And they always occur in connection with worship, either of the true God or of false gods. These words give us a clue toward the deeper issues that are at stake. They portray the undeniable fact that Haman's desire was not that men bow down in respect for his office and authority, but that they bow down and pay homage to Haman as a god. That appears to be the case as Haman later takes upon himself the power of life, death, and judgment in a great ethnic purge. Haman symbolized everything Mordecai has been grasping for in the Persian culture. Suddenly he realizes it's become a matter of life and death. In reality, it always had been, but now Mordecai saw it clearly. As these things began to dawn on Mordecai, he realized he had to do something radical. If you understand this, he heard God's message to him, you're in pretty big trouble. It's time to take a stand. How long before Mordecai decided to take a stand, we'll never know. But as Haman strutted by the king's gate, and all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. From that moment on, Mordecai could no longer hide his identity because he had told them he was a Jew. I want you to notice the spiritual concept. When we defy evil, we own our identity. When we take a stand for God, we accept and are in control of who we are. Up until now, Mordecai had commanded Esther to disguise her identity as a Jew. Not surprisingly, Mordecai was the first to disclose his own identity, and when he did, it triggered an all-out attempt to destroy both him and his people. And now we get a closer look at what sin and evil's real nature is. We see revealed seething anger, deceitful manipulations, distorted truth, bold-faced lies, bribes, false accusation, and finally a death warrant. The die are rolled, and the full measure of evil unfurls to destroy those who would follow God. That takes us back to the theme expressed in Vashti's moral choice of not appearing naked before the king's princess in that party recorded in Esther 1. If you disobey the king, when you reject the will of our world and the Hamans of our world, when you stand for what is right, history will never be the same. Every time someone in the book of Esther resists the world's power, chooses to do the right thing, the course of history alters, and God works in surprising ways. Reversals take place, and people change. But even though the world is different, it may well cost you a price, those who take that personal stand for what is morally right. In spite of that, such obedience sets God free to do the things he might otherwise not be able to do for his people or the lost individuals of our world. Oswald Chambers puts it like this. He says, we are so involved in the universal purposes of God that immediately when we obey God, others are affected. We can disobey God if we choose, and it will bring us immediate relief from the situation, but we shall be a grief to our Lord. But if we obey God, he will look after those who have suffered because of our obedience. We have simply to obey and leave the consequences with him. Mordecai soon learns this principle very well. Not only did his obedience to God put his people under the threat of death, it threw the entire city of Susa into chaos. Mordecai 3:15. The city of Susa was in confusion. The next few months are a frightening threat of a Holocaust. If you were to choose, what image would you choose to represent the age-long controversy between Satan and God's people? What image would you select to typify the frightening issues that God's people will face once more in the end time? Could it be the story of Esther? Could Mordecai, as a descendant of King Saul, and Haman, as a descendant of King Agag, be forerunners of a renewed battle against the arch enemy of God's people? Could it be that as Haman stands against all who represent the true God, the final man of sin, the Antichrist, will stand in opposition to all that Jesus Christ represents? I think so. Remember, Esther has a future orientation, an end time aspect to its message. God intended that these things were written for our example. The deadly encounter with evil in Esther points to a future in which the face of Haman will appear again. Prophets and Kings tells us in the last days, Satan will arouse indignation against the minority who refuse to accept popular customs and traditions. Revelation tells of a time when those who refuse to worship the beast will be under the threat of death. Revelation 13:15-17. And there was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast might even speak and cause as many as who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. In that day, the words of Haman to King Ahasuerus will be spoken again. Esther 3, verse 8. There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from other people, and they do not observe the king's laws, so it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. The trying experience of Esther will repeat itself on a global scale, reaching down to that hour in which the dragon is angry and launches war with the woman and the remnant of her seed who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. And again, the words of Mrs. White link the two pivotal moments of Esther's day and the last days together. She says the trying experiences that came to God's people in the days of Esther were not peculiar to that age alone. The Revelator, looking down the ages to the close of time, has declared the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. The decree that will finally go forth against the remnant people of God will be very similar to that issued by Ahasuerus against the Jews. Today, the enemies of the true church see in that little company keeping the Sabbath commandment a Mordecai at the gate. The reverence of God's people for his law is a constant rebuke to those who are trampling on his Sabbath. Today, as in Esther's day, God will vindicate his truth and his people. 8 job applicants. Each one sitting in a busy, noise-filled office, each waiting for an interview for a job as a Morse code operator. And all the while they wait, a telegraph has been ticking in the background noise of a busy office. The announcement in Morse code: if you understand this message, come on in, the job is yours. Only one stopped to hear the click-clack of the receiver and understood its coded message. Only one walked through the door and got the job. We live in a world that is full of busyness and clatter, much like that office. As the case of God's people in Esther's day, In Esther's day, the noise of all that our world has to offer distracts us. We're unable to hear the still small voice of God as He speaks through the signs of our times, or even the events taking place in our own everyday lives. So often we're not thinking about what's taking place around us. We don't stop to consider the moral and spiritual implications of our own personal decisions or even where our world is headed. Esther sets forth a picture of a loving God who sends His people messages of warning. A God who does not allow us to continue in our slumber or our compromise, but is working behind the scene to awaken us to what looms on the horizon. His warnings are usually subtle, but they're an understandable code. He designs a warning message for each one of us. It can be some sign in our world or our personal life, something we read, something we see, something we experience. Whatever it is, God says, if you understand this, you're in pretty big trouble. It's time to take a stand. God is our friend. He's not going to let us drift along without a warning in a dangerous, hell-bent world. Compromise sucks the moral and the spiritual discernment out of us. But God is still working to reach us. He gives us opportunity for us to understand evil's nature. Mordecai received the message because he caught the code. And again, it's part of the surprise and irony of this little book that God uses the very thing that will try to destroy them to arouse spiritual passion among His people and to accomplish His purpose for them. He will do it again in the end. God will work through His Holy Spirit in a way carefully designed to awaken His lethargic people. Now, some will miss His work or warning altogether because they're not watching or waiting. They won't be up on the issues because they're not familiar with His Word. As a result, they will neither understand their identity nor have the opportunity to change the course of history opening before them. Tragically, they will miss the subtle but still understandable code. If only they had prayed and watched and listened. Behind the scene of this world lurks a deadly evil with but one passion: to destroy you and me. Behind the scene of many of God's people is a faith that has grown lukewarm and tired, and it needs to be awakened. We have an identity that needs to be openly revealed and claimed. Behind the scene is a merciful and gracious God who relentlessly works His sovereign providence in a way that would help us to see the evil staring us in the face. He's not trying to frighten us or to paralyze us, but to enable us to discover He is there to empower and preserve us if we will fully own our identity as His son, His daughter, His remnant people.